All right, guys. Hello. Just going to give it as I can't see anything. So I'm not really sure if it's recording anything. Up. There it goes. There it goes. All right. So I'm outside, so it's hard to see. And randomly during this video, I may have to pause because I have my Google Meet link open just in case anyone needs to join. But Candymakers. So let me see where we left off. Yes. Miles wanted to go to the library, and everyone else headed off to... Where did they head to? Well, let's read and find out. Alrighty, here we are. So we're on page 45 for those of you that are following along. Here we are, Max announced, turning his back to the doors. The jewel in the crown of the Life is Sweet candy factory. Our pride and joy, the reason our candy tastes like no other. The tropical room. He whirled around and tugged the door handle, then sighed in defeat. Logan giggled. No one but Avery, and maybe Fran, was strong enough to open the heavy, pressure-sealed door without assistance. Still, he had to hand it to Max for trying. Max pretended to glare at Logan, then pushed the red button on the side of the door, which then slid open easily. The humid air rushed out to greet them, a sensation Logan once compared to being hit in the face with a hot, wet washcloth, but in a good way. They filed in, moving a bit more slowly as a result of the thick air. "Ahoy there!" Avery called down from the top of the sapodilla tree, where he was extracting chicle to make gum. "Can someone pass up the funnel? I left it down by the bucket." "Sure, Avery," Logan called, scrambling over the tree's roots to find the metal funnel. For a second, he was tempted to shinny up the tree, and hand it to him, but climbing the trees was against the rules. This was one of the hardest rules in the whole factory for Logan to obey. Every day he watched the workers slice the bark in crisscrosses until the yellowy goo, which later would be boiled and purified and transformed into gum, slid down into the cloth bags waiting at the bottom. Once the cuts stopped dripping, they hardened, leaving inch-wide diagonal tunnels on the trunk that were perfect for a boy's toes to grip onto. Logan had to admit, though, after all the effort the factory had made, going to a real jungle at the equator to get the trees, transporting them here, replanting them, and imitating their natural surroundings well enough to ensure their continued survival, climbing them for sport probably wasn't the best idea. I'm going to turn myself so that there's no sun in your eyes. We'll go this way. As you can see, I'm outside of school. All right. This might be a little bit better. Okay. Let me see where I was. Under the sapodilla tree was his favorite place to be in the whole factory. When he hugged the tree's narrow trunk, which admittedly he did a lot, he swore he could feel its heart beating. Plus, it smelled like caramel. Without his realizing it, his arms had begun to embrace the tree. Common sense quickly warned him that hugging a tree with the other three watching wouldn't be a good idea. He quickly disentangled himself and attached the funnel to the pulley system. He then tugged the rope until the funnel started moving up among the branches. "Thanks, mate," Avery called down as he plucked the funnel from the pulley. From his position below, all Logan could see of Avery's head was the blue bandana he wore to keep the sweat out of his eyes. The glass roof curved so high up above their heads that on sunny days like this, the trees looked as if they could disappear into the blue sky of a real jungle. A few seconds later, Avery swung his strong legs around a branch and popped his head through the leaves. "Who are your new friends?" Logan stepped aside as the others tentatively approached the tree. Neither Daisy nor Philip volunteered their names. They were too busy staring, open-jawed. Avery laughed. "First time in a tropical room, eh?" Logan nodded, proud that the room would elicit such a response. "These are two of the other kids in the candy competition with me," he explained. "Daisy and Philip. Miles will be along soon. Max is giving them a tour of the factory." With the help of the harness around his waist, Avery twisted around until he was hanging completely upside down. He extended his hand, speckled with yellow glue, and the two visitors took turns shaking it. Daisy blushed. Philip, however, took out another handkerchief. Logan couldn't help wondering how many he had in there, and wiped both hands front and back. "Have fun, kids," Avery said, adjusting his bandana. "Make some good candy. We could use it around here." He punched Logan good-naturedly on the arm and pulled himself back up the tree. Let me just make sure. Sorry. Where's the pause button? All right, keep reading. After a few minutes of letting them watch the gooey liquid darken as it made its way down the trunk, Max continued the tour of the tropical room. Daisy lingered so long at the cinnamon tree, stroking its soft bark and smelling it, that Max had to threaten to continue on the cocoa trees without her. She tore herself away with a final deep inhale. Stepping carefully over the vanilla vines and around the tall stalks of sugarcane, they approached the section of the room where the cocoa trees grew, under an elaborate sprinkler system that rained water on the trees every few hours. It must have just stopped because the leaves and the reddish-purple pods were still dripping. The cocoa trees, shrouded in shade, grew so much shorter than the other trees in the room that the kids could easily reach the pods on the lower branches. Logan was about to demonstrate this when he caught sight of Miles trying to untangle a vine from around his ankle. He ran over to help. Once Miles' ankle was free, Logan said, "So what do you think?" He hoped that Miles loved the room as much as he did. All right, so here's the word I can't pronounce. It looks like it is in a different language. Siti El Bernici, Miles replied. "What did you say?" Logan asked, wondering if Miles had spoken another language. He hoped not. No one at the factory had taught him foreign language yet. "I meant to say it's incredible," Miles exclaimed, beaming. "Glad you could join us, Miles," Max said, patting the nearest trunk. "This is where it all begins, my friends. A chocolate bar is only as good as the bean it comes from. These trees are cultivated in the finest soil and given the perfect amount of shade, sun, heat, and rain." He glanced at his watch and then up to the roof. "In fact, it's just about time to let in the sun." A minute later, they heard a grinding sound high above as the long metal slats that covered the roof began to slide into the grooves of the wall. Sunlight slowly filtered in, streaming through the leaves and sending a shiver of pleasure down Logan's spine. He saw Miles shiver too, and it made him wish again that the factory hadn't stopped giving tours. Everyone should get to experience stuff like this. He'd even offered to lead the tours so no one would have to leave their post. "Come on," he said to the others. "I want to show you something really neat." He was about to lead them over to the long rows of dry cocoa beans when Max's walkie-talkie crackled to life. Max slipped it off his belt, held up one finger to them to wait, and stepped a few feet away. "Do you come down here a lot?" Miles asked Logan as they waited. Logan nodded. "I like to check on the trees first thing in the morning. The sapodilla is my favorite." "Are you allowed to climb them?" Daisy asked, glancing back at her beloved cinnamon tree. Logan shook his head. "Don't you want to?" she asked. "All the time. But only Avery and his crew are allowed. Someday I hope to work on the sapodilla." Let's see. All right. Philip made a noise that sounded halfway between a guffaw and a sneeze. "Are you okay?" Logan asked wearily. He hoped another hiccuping fit wasn't on the way. You're the heir to an entire candy factory, and all you want to do is drain sap from a tree? Before Logan could think of a response, Max returned with a worried expression on his face. That was Randall in quality control, he explained. He's concerned about the nougat. He said it tastes off. Off, Miles replied. Randall had been the factory's quality control guy for 20 years, and Logan admired him greatly. Randall's taste buds were even more finely tuned than his own. If Randall said something tasted off, then it was off. Logan silently checked the list of ingredients in nougat: sugar, corn syrup, vanilla, butter, salt, egg whites, and honey. Could there be an egg quality issue? Their chickens were fed the highest quality of food, and the farm workers monitored the health of the animals, very closely. Any problems would have been discovered before now. Then Logan remembered something that Paulo in beekeeping had said a few days ago. I bet it was the honey, he exclaimed. Paulo told me the queen of the hive didn't have long to live. If she died, the worker bees would be really depressed. Maybe that's what happened. Max nodded thoughtfully. Yes, that would do it. This calls for a bit of a detour on the tour. Detour on the tour. That's funny. He shook his head as his own joke. This time, it was Logan's turn to roll his eyes. That was pretty bad, boss, Daisy said, grinning. Let me get this straight, Philip said, pushing low branches and leaves out of his way as they headed back toward the entrance. Bees get depressed over another bee dying, and the honey somehow tastes different? Is that what you're saying? The queen's not just any bee, Logan said. She's the glue that holds the hive together. Bees don't make glue, Philip pointed out. They make honey. You know what I mean, Logan said calmly, refusing to rise to Philip's bait. Without the queen, the worker bees don't know what to do. It's like they forgot how to make honey. All we need, and we need a lot of honey here. We use it in about half of our recipes. So what are you supposed to do about it? Philip asked Max. Isn't your job in the lab? Well, Philip, Max said as he pushed the button open to the door. As life is sweet, we all like to help. At Life is Sweet, we all like to help out when we can. Logan here has a way with bees, don't you, son? A way with bees, Miles repeated as they walked down the hallway. The moisture rising from his face made him look oddly pale. Logan tried not to blush. I don't know. They seem to listen to me or something. Now don't be modest, Max chastised as they hurried down the long corridor that led to the bee room. Logan has a way of charming bees. And girls, Max winked. Logan's cheeks burned. He kept his gaze forward, hoping Daisy hadn't heard Max's comment, as if he'd ever charmed a girl in his life. They didn't say much as they traveled through more long corridors, up one staircase and down another. By the time they reached the bee room, Logan's embarrassment had faded enough that he was able to hand Daisy the required protective gear, helmet, goggles, and long gloves, without avoiding her eyes. Thanks, she said, plopping the helmet over her head, adjusting the goggles. Do I look like an alien? Sort of, Logan admitted. I'll just wait here, Miles said when Logan tried to hand him. There it is. Sorry, I'm trying to put my mouse on the pause button so that if anyone pops into our meet, I can pause. Okay, sorry. No need for concern, Max assured him. The bees aren't dangerous at all. The gear is really only for insurance purposes. Miles still hesitated. Unless you're allergic, Max asked. Miles glumly shook his head and held out his arms for the gear. We're eventually going to learn how to make candy, right? Philip asked. The contest is in 2 days. Yes, of course, Max promised. But this is part of your training, too. To understand how candy works, you have to know how the ingredients come together. Without honey, for instance, you'd be very limited in what you can make for the contest. Philip muttered something about not needing honey for his recipe. With a nod from Max, Logan pushed the door open slowly, making sure none of the bees flew close enough to escape. As usual, the buzzing reached his ear before he actually saw any bees. The large room, the second largest in the whole factory, had 2 solid walls and 2 made of giant screens. Sunlight streamed through the screens and threw thousands of tiny crisscrosses shadows onto the opposite walls. Daisy gasped when they reached the huge garden that filled the center of the room. Usually, the bees hungrily sucked the nectar from the hundreds of colorful flowers to take back to the hive. Today, only a few stragglers buzzed around the plants, flying lazily, as if their hearts just weren't in it. Miles stopped near the first bed of flowers and seemed intent on going no further. As Logan wound his way through the flowers and shrubs, the buzzing became progressively louder. He found Paulo kneeling on the floor, peering into the largest of the hives where the queen resided. Totally engrossed, Paulo didn't even look up. He just kept making little clucking sounds as the bees flew in and out erratically, not in their usual smooth routines. Logan liked Paulo a lot, and he was completely dedicated to the well-being of the bees, and at 25, he was one of the youngest workers. He also called Logan Dude. After a minute passed, Logan cleared his throat. Paulo jumped up, clearly surprised to find he was no longer alone in the big room. "Oh, hey, dude," he said, sounding more subdued than Logan had ever heard him. Noticing Daisy and Philip, he added, "And, other dude and dudette, who I don't know," to Logan, he said. "The queen passed. The worker bees are in mourning. Will you join me in a moment of silence?" Logan nodded and knelt beside his friend. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Daisy yanking Philip down. Logan knew his world differed from that of most people. Most kids did not mourn the death of a honeybee, queen or no. But for 2 years, that queen bee had been the reason the other bees had made the honey that flavored the candy at Life is Sweet, indirectly bringing pleasure to thousands of kids. Max joined them, and they all bowed their heads as Paulo gave a short prayer of thanks to the queen's years of service. The other bees seemed to silence their buzzing too. No one spoke or buzzed for a full minute. Then Miles screamed. And I'm going to stop there for today. So that was the end of chapter 3. So the next time I read, I will read chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed these pages. And Mrs. Slattery, signing out.